Hello, these are Flip Notes 1.5 Part 4, still in Sensation and Perception, and this section is all about hearing. My Bitmoji is listening to her music, and in this section we're going to learn about how she's able to do that. Let's go.
So in order for hearing to occur, there has to be sound waves or vibrations in the air. Those sound waves travel through your ear. They put pressure on various tiny bones in the inner ear. That causes tiny little hair cells that you've got in your inner ear to move back and forth. And then magic happens. Those sound waves or sound vibrations are converted into neural impulses that the brain can understand. They travel along the auditory nerve and then to the brain. So sound is actually measured in decibels. Decibels measures loudness. With every 10 decibel increase, a sound gets 10 times louder. So a faint whisper is only about 30 decibels. Anything that's about 85 decibels or higher has the potential to cause hearing damage. Now, if it's only 85 decibels, you'd have to hear that sound over a prolonged period of time. But something really loud, like a firecracker going off right by you, that's 125 decibels, and that can cause hearing damage immediately. Or being near a gunshot or a jet engine that's taking off. A lawnmower, even prolonged sounds, the higher the decibel, the greater the damage can cause to your ears. The pitch of a sound, or whether it sounds like a high note or a low note, depends on the actual frequency of the sound wave. Our ears can sense sound waves that vary from 20 all the way up to 20,000 cycles per second. Different characteristics of the actual sound wave affect the different properties of sound. The amplitude is how loud the sound is. Think of a speaker that has more amps to it, it gets louder. The frequency of the wave or how quickly the waves are moving affects the pitch, high or low. Low would be slow moving waves. And then the purity affects the timbre. And by timbre, we mean the quality of the sound, kind of like just what the sound, actually, how it differs. So, for example, the same musical note played on a guitar versus a piano versus an actual voice has a different tone to it, and that's part of the timbre. Here we've got the anatomy of the ear, and you'll be doing a drag and drop over this one as well. So our outer ear consists of the pinna, and almost all of these have a second name, just to make it nice and confusing for you. The pinna is also called the auricle, but that's that kind of flap on your ear, and it's actually specially designed like that in order to direct vibrations down into your ear. Our ear canal or auditory canal, which is lined with hairs and collects wax. Now, when we say we're talking about hair cells, that's not the hair we're talking about. There's going to be some teeny tiny hairs located in the snail looking part. So the outer ear, pinna, and auditory canal. The middle ear consists of the eardrum, which is also called the tympanic membrane. As it vibrates because of the pressure from the sound waves. It puts pressure on three tiny bones. Individually, they're called the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. They are also called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, which will be on the next slide. And as a group, they are known as the ossicles. But those three are the smallest bones in the human body. So they will continuously vibrate against each other as you are hearing sounds, as you're listening to me right now. Also in the ear, we have our inner ear section, and it includes the semicircular canals. These actually don't have anything to do with hearing. They have to do with your sense of balance. They're filled with fluid that helps us to judge up from down, and it sends messages along the vestibular nerve to the brain. Just below the semicircular canals is where the important stuff is happening for hearing. We have the cochlea, which is this snail-shaped structure, and inside of it is the basilar membrane, which is lined with tiny little hair cells. And that's where the magic is happening. That's where vibrations are being converted into neural impulses that will travel to the auditory nerve and then to the brain. Another view here, but kind of just from the opposite way, we've got our sound waves being directed in from the pinna and down the auditory canal, putting pressure on our eardrum. The eardrum vibrates against the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, and that puts pressure on the cochlea, And then in this picture, we've got all these nerves coming from the cochlea because this is where that transduction is happening and a neural impulse is being created and sent along the auditory nerve. There are some other tubes here. These are known as eustachian tubes. Some of these go to the larynx towards the throat. In the eustachian tubes, that's where fluid can get trapped. So when you have an ear infection, it can be due to irritation or inflammation of that area. And also if you get air, like if your ears need to pop, it could be because of air pressure buildup in these tubes here. And all of this kind of connects to your jaw, which is why like if you need to pop your ears, sometimes you can just go like yawn like that, or if you just chew gum, because stretching your jaw would help to kind of flex this tube that's right here a little bit. It's all kind of connected. So the pathway of sound, we studied the pathway of vision, so we've got to know it for sound as well. So sound waves are funneled by the outer ear, which is also called the auricle or the pinna, to the eardrum. And the eardrum is also the tympanic membrane. Think of like a timpani or a really, really big drum, causing it to vibrate. Then the ossicles, which are the bones, that includes the hammer anvil stirrup down here, the malleus, incus, and stapes, puts pressure on the oval window and the cochlea, which is our snail-shaped structure. In the cochlea, the basilar membranes, this is where transduction is occurring. The organ of Corti is part of the lining there, and then our hair cell receptors are moving back and forth, kind of like seaweed in the ocean, because there is fluid there in the cochlea. And as those hair cells move back and forth, they're converting those vibrations into a neural impulse. We'll watch a video animation of that in class. Here we've got a closer look of the inside of that cochlea or the snail-shaped structure, that the fluid is constantly moving and swishing around in this pattern. And then there's these hair cells that are protruding or sticking out from the lining. And as that fluid moves back and forth, it's causing the hair cells to sort of sway back and forth, and that's where transduction is occurring. An even more zoomed in version here, this is the lining of the cochlea, and here are those hair cells that are in the basilar membrane. And these hair cells can be pretty fragile, and if you experience hearing loss, it's because you have damaged those those hair cells. Here's part of our auditory pathway when we get into the brain. So down here, we've got our ears on the side of this person's head. Here's our cochlea. So now we have a neural impulse that's traveling into their head, basically, and it crisscrosses. Because remember, what you hear on the left side is going to be processed by the right side of your brain. And what you hear on the right side will go to the left side. So here's that crisscross. That signal is going to go to the thalamus. Remember, the thalamus directs sensory signals except for smell. And then the thalamus is going to direct it to the temporal lobes, which is on the sides of our head above kind of our ears. Or we can see it in this diagram up here. And that's where our primary auditory cortex is. So the full pathway of sound, the sound waves vibrate bones of the middle ear. The stirrup hits against the oval window of the cochlea. It sets the fluid that's inside the cochlea in motion. Hair cells are stimulated with the movement of the basilar membrane, and then those hair cells move against the organ of Corti, and that's the true structure that goes with transduction or the magic. Remember, transduction is when the physical stimulation, which is vibrations, is converted into a neural impulse that the brain can understand. The impulses travel along the auditory nerve to the thalamus and then to the auditory cortex or the temporal lobes. So this one I think is a little bit harder than the vision one, but you'll get it. We'll figure out these orders. Yeah, it is a pretty delicate process, and to think this is happening constantly right now as you're listening to me. But if anything is messed up along the way, that's where hearing loss can occur. Hearing loss is pretty common among Americans. Different causes from birth defects, disease, sometimes really high fevers can cause hearing loss, just aging, but also injuries and overexposure, probably the thing you guys need to worry about the most. Noise-induced hearing loss, also called stimulation deafness, happens progressively or gradually over time after being exposed to lots and lots of high-frequency sounds. What you're actually doing is damaging the hair cells. Once those hair cells are damaged, they die off and they don't regenerate. Generally, any sound loud enough to produce Tinnitus, which is the ringing of the ears, causes damage. So tinnitus, pretty much anytime your ears are ringing afterwards, you have caused hair cells to scream. It's like they're screaming and dying. And then a really, really loud sound can actually tear off the hair cells of the inner ear. Pretty scary to think of that happening. Conduction deafness happens when something is wrong with the inner ear, or sorry, the middle ear, where the bones are not working or the eardrum is failing to vibrate. This could be because of a buildup of fluid, but also this kind of just happens with aging. A hearing aid can help with this. A hearing aid is really just basically a microphone that sits in the ear canal. It creates stronger or louder vibration, so it's putting even more pressure on the eardrum and the ossicles. But normal hearing could return. Sensory neural deafness is a little bit more complicated to try to repair. With this, there's damage to the inner ear. And remember, the inner ear is where that transduction or magic is happening. So usually it means there's damage to the cochlea or to the auditory nerve. Sometimes a cochlear implant can help with this, but it's not always guaranteed. A cochlear implant, we'll talk about this a little bit more in class, but basically it's an artificial cochlea that's doing the transduction process for the ear. And a couple pieces are sitting on the ear as well as attached to the outer edge of the skull. Stimulation deafness is pretty much what I already talked about due to noise. Prolonged exposure to anything 85 decibels or higher can cause deafness. A few theories of what allows us to hear. The frequency theory says that each nerve impulse has a different frequency of waves up the auditory nerve, and that matches the frequency of a tone, so we're able to sense pitches. So our ears are able to detect all the different frequencies of waves. The place theory says that there's actually a specific place on the basilar membrane designed to pick up on different pitches. And then the localization of sound says that we're able to know where sounds are coming from because we're able to detect if a sound hits one ear before the other, just by a tiny bit. You know, if a sound is coming from my side, it hits my right ear before it hits my left ear. And my brain is able to detect that fraction of a second difference from when I hear the two sounds, and that helps me to localize or figure out the location of the sound.